My name is Jack Haynes, and I'm an elder and lifetime member of First Presbyterian Church. I hope you enjoy the history of the sanctuary today as much as I did compiling the information. Thanks to Steve Folks for his help in putting the slides together, and thanks to Adrian, who works in the church print shop. The organizational date for First Presbyterian Church was June 4th, 1795. They met each Sunday in the old wooden State House, which faced Assembly Street. Services were moved to the Chapel of South Carolina College in 1805. It was later named Rutledge College. It is located on the USC Horseshoe. In 1813, the church purchased the Granby Courthouse that was located across the Congaree River in Casey. I doubt if there are 20 people in the whole congregation that have ever seen this picture. We found it in a museum. And talk about getting excited. We do not know what the purchase amount was. The building was dismantled piece by piece and barged across the Congaree River and reconstructed on the corner of Marion and Lady Streets. It was the first sanctuary, and it cost $8,000 to build. It was a two-story wooden building. The building was dedicated in 1814. In 1833, a brick wall was constructed around the burial ground at the cost of $245.08. In 1851, the congregation had outgrown the first building, and the construction of a new church building was planned. The old church building was moved to the center of Lady Street using mule power. I'd love to have seen that. The congregation continued to meet in the old building until the new church was completed. The last service in the old church building took place on October 2nd, 1853. The original church building was sold to John R. Anniversay and moved to the corner of Lady and Marion Street. It was rebuilt and used as a residence with his family while he supervised the construction of the new State House. The cost to build the second sanctuary was $35,000. The new church was dedicated on October 9, 1853. It had 3 front doors and no side doors and no steps going in, no granite steps. It went straight into the pulpit. It was English Gothic revival structure of rose stucco and arched stained glass windows, vaulted ribbed ceilings, tracery work, and a grateful steeple 180 feet high. Inside, there was a center aisle with 2 side aisles, just like it is now. There were 7 gas chandeliers suspended above the center aisle. A large marble pulpit costing $3,000 was given to the church by Robert Latter. The pulpit came from Italy and is currently in the Smith Memorial Chapel on Washington Street. On Saturday, May 1st, 1875, a terrific rainstorm with wind and hail passed over Columbia, and the steeple was blown down. The church held its services in the Opera House, which was located on the corner of Main and Gervais Streets. The Wade Hampton Hotel was later built there. Repairs were not made on the church from the windstorm until 1887. In 1888, a new steeple was built. It was 188 feet high and was the tallest structure in the city. The marble pulpit was taken down and replaced by one that was wooden. The wooden pulpit is located in the ministry building in the archives room. If y'all go to Dan's presentation, when you go in the front door, If you'll look to your left, you'll see a glassed-in area. That pulpit's sitting in there. It looks like brand new. It's 134 years old. And it's heavy, too. On February 23rd, 1910, a newspaper man was returning home from his night's work. He noticed a glow of light inside the belfry of the First Presbyterian Church steeple. The building was being repaired and painted, and a fire, probably caused by spontaneous combustion of the painter's oily rags, had crept up the inside of the steeple. Flames burst from the seams of the lofty steeple. Fire engines could not throw water high enough to save the steeple. As the iron framework of the steeple weakened, more than half of the upper portion fell with a terrific crash to the slate roof below. By the autumn of 1910, the steeple was replaced, and a new bell was given by a church member, Felix Baker Woodrow. The bell is 112 years old. During the repair of the steeple, a steeplejack, whose name we did not know, was involved with the repairs on top of the steeple. He had someone take his picture while he stood on the very top of the steeple with his arms stretched upward toward the sky. Can you see him up there? He's standing on the very tip. When y'all go outside, look at the steeple. It'll scare you to death. He's standing on the very tip top of the steeple with his arms up like this. The church administrator and I, over the years, have said, we'll never find out who that nut was. So I'm in charge of all the money counting teams for the church. There's 4 teams, and my team happened to be counting in that time it was called the Palmer Building, and I walked over to the window and looked out, and there was a bucket truck going up the side of the steeple here. They were painting the church. And so I called my other 3 team members over, and I said, have y'all seen the picture of the man standing on the top of the steeple? And one guy said, yeah, I've seen it. Now, he was in his 80s. And I said, I've said for years that we will never know who that nut was. He said, I know who it was. I said, yeah, right. He said, no, he just came through our inquiry. His grandson just came through our inquirers class, and he joined our church. So I got his phone number, and I called, and this guy answered the phone, and I said, my name's Jack Haynes. I'm an elder at First Presbyterian Church. And in our history book, there's a picture of a man standing on the tip of the steeple, and there's one hanging in the Palmer Building, same picture. And we don't know who that was. And he said, when was the picture taken? I said, 1910. He said, that was my grandfather. So we met the next weekend down here at the Palmer Building. He had a shopping bag full of pictures of his grandfather. He was known throughout the Southeast as a fantastic steeplejack. So his name was John Whalen. He lived to be 91 years old. He's buried in Winsboro, and I wished I could have met him. He died in 1971. But now we know the name of who's on the steeple, where we didn't have it before. But the Columbia newspaper came down and did an article, and it was on a Saturday morning newspaper. It was called Who's on the Steeple? So we know now. In 1920, the church building was showing signs of deterioration and needed repairs. While the repairs were being made, the church held its services in nearby Columbia High School auditorium. In January 1925, a special committee recommended to the session that the church building be enlarged. When the plan was presented, there was no discussion. When the question was called, the congregation stood without exception to adopt the plan. In 1925, the east side of the church building was lengthened by 38 feet. If you'll see the surveyor's tape on this pole and this pole here, this is where the wall ended on the building in 1925 before we lengthened it. So it went back 38 feet. When the church was lengthened, it was necessitated building over burial plots. So there are people buried under the choir loft. Permission was given by all the families involved, and there are 13 to 16 persons buried in the area that was extended. The whole area within the extended building was covered with a sheet of concrete, and a small marble tablet was placed over each grave, bearing the name of the deceased and the date of the death. The gravestones and monuments were preserved and placed against the outside back of the wall of the church. The enlarged church building seated 980 compared to 700 before. The floor of the auditorium was raised at the church's main entrance and sloped toward the pulpit. Actually, it was kind of that way. Granite steps were added to the front to accommodate the raised floor. The two smaller Gothic arched doorways on either side of the big church door were closed. At that time, we had 3 front doors on the church. The wide center aisle was replaced with 2 narrow center aisles. When my wife and I got married in 1968, her father walked her down this aisle here. We got married, walked back up that way. And after the fire, they made it back to where it is now, where it originally was. New entrances were added near each of the corners of the north and south walls on Saturday, October 3rd, 1925. After a meeting for almost a year in the Columbia High Auditorium, the congregation returned to its church building. On Sunday, January 20th, 1929, afternoon vesper services from First Presbyterian Church were broadcast over the radio. It was the first time in the history of the city that such a broadcast had taken place. The marble baptismal font was presented by Mr. and Mrs. Hayward Bayless and was used for the first time on October 10th, 1943. Sometime around 1945, oscillating metal-bladed fans, if you'll look at those strips that are hanging there, there were oscillating fans all the way around underneath the balcony. We didn't have air conditioning then, so they were cooling things off. And handheld fans were placed in all the pews. So the metal-bladed fans made so much noise they voted to take them down because people couldn't hear what the preacher was saying. Cushions were installed on the pews in the 1950s, and the church was air-conditioned, hallelujah, in 1956. In 1970, the property committee installed a handrail. If you'll look up there where the surveyor's tape is, they installed a handrail on top of the handrail because children would set their hymn book up on the flat rail. And many times growing up, I saw many hymn books floating down to the first floor where they had bumped them. This has worked real well. When the organist first came here, one of the minister's children was sitting up here and knocked a book off and it hit him in the leg. That's only the few times, though, since we put the rail up that I've known of a book to fall. In 1978, a capital fund drive raised $400,000 for repair to church buildings and the chimes and for the installation of a new organ. The work was completed in the fall of 1980. Wilson's going to cover some of this in just a few minutes. On March 11th, 1982, a little after 1 o'clock in the morning, a police officer making his rounds discovered that the First Presbyterian Church sanctuary was on fire. The fire department arrived about 2 minutes after the alarm was sounded. They were able to extinguish the fire at about 1:45 a.m. The fire chief indicated that if they had arrived 15 minutes later, it would have been impossible to stop the fire. The church had survived the 1865 fire of Columbia, a tornado in 1875, and a fire in the steeple in 1910. It would also survive the fire of 1982. The sanctuary was repaired generally the way it was, but with some changes and improvements. Renovations to the sanctuary were completed in 1983. The additions included the rose window over organ, the enlarged Gothic ark, the new chandeliers, and a marble-faced pulpit. A center aisle was added to replace the 2 aisles that were installed in 1925. In 1983, the new Cassavant organ was installed. In 1987, a tradition was begun by the Sunday school department. Each Sunday morning, the Sunday school superintendent would take a child from the 4/5-year-old Sunday school class over to the sanctuary and up to the balcony to ring the big church bell. They would pull the rope 11 times and the bell would ring 10 times. This would let those who could hear the bell know that Sunday school was over. The child would receive a sticker that read, "I rang the church bell today," and the date. This has been done for over 35 years. It is estimated that over 1,200 children have rung the bell. Please feel free to go to the balcony after the presentations are over and see the room where the children pull the rope. Thanks for coming. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation and have learned something about the history of First Presbyterian Church.